The slap exploded across the brass lantern cafe so loudly that every conversation died at once. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips, laptops stopped clicking, and even the espresso machine seemed to fall silent. Owen Mercer stood in the center of the room with his 6-year-old daughter clinging to his neck, her tiny hands trembling against his faded flannel shirt. A red mark burned across his cheek, but he did not move. He did not shout. He did not raise a fist. In front of him, billionaire CEO Elara Voss still had her hand lifted, breathing hard, her white designer suit stained with splashes of hot chocolate and rage. Moments earlier, she had knocked little Lottie to the floor, called her a filthy nuisance, threatened to have her taken away from her father, and then struck Owen when he demanded an apology. Everyone expected him to snap. He looked like a tired single dad with worn boots and empty pockets, the kind of man powerful people think they can crush without consequence. But Owen only tightened his arm around his daughter and asked in a voice so calm it made the room colder, "Are you finished?" That was when Elara's bodyguard, Kellen Rourke, pushed through the crowd, ready to put Owen on the floor. But then Kellen saw the scar along Owen's jaw. He saw the faded tattoo on his forearm. He saw the eyes of a man he had once watched walk through gunfire like death itself had stepped aside. The bodyguard went pale, lowered his hands, and whispered 2 words that changed everything. Commander Mercer. So who was the man Elara Voss had just humiliated in front of the whole cafe? On most mornings, Owen Mercer looked like a man the world could walk past without remembering. He was 42, broad-shouldered, quiet-eyed, with a faded flannel shirt, worn denim, and boots that had seen too many years of rain, dust, and long walks through places he never spoke about. To the parents at Lottie's elementary school, he was simply the single father who always arrived 10 minutes early, packed fruit slices in tiny containers, and knelt down when speaking to his daughter so she never had to look up at him like he was another towering adult in a world already too big for her. To the neighbors in their modest Denver rental, he was polite, private, and helpful in the way men become when they know how to fix things but do not know how to explain themselves. None of them knew that Owen's calm was not emptiness, that his silence was not weakness, and that the careful way his eyes moved across every room came from 15 years of surviving missions no official record would ever describe. Once he had been the kind of man generals called only when failure was not an option. Once his name had traveled through special operations circles in the low tone reserved for men who had walked into fire and brought others back alive. But that life had ended the day his wife, Mara, made him promise from a hospital bed that their daughter would still laugh after she was gone. Mara had been the soft center of Owen's brutal world, the woman who could make him forget the sound of gunfire by asking him to chop onions for dinner, the woman who had looked at the scars on his body and seen not damage, but survival. Cancer took her slowly, cruelly, without negotiation. Owen had faced armed men collapsing buildings, burning vehicles, and nights so cold, fear itself felt frozen. But nothing had trained him to sit beside Mara while she grew smaller beneath white sheets and whispered, "Promise me she'll still laugh." So he retired. He folded away uniforms Lottie had never seen, locked medals in a metal box, moved to Denver, and built a life around lunchboxes, bedtime stories, grocery lists, school forms, and the sacred labor of making one little girl feel safe. Lottie Mercer was 6 years old, stubborn in pink sneakers, serious about pancakes, and loyal to anything with butterflies on it. She wore her hair in uneven pigtails because Owen was still learning mismatched socks because she insisted they were more interesting, and a denim jacket covered in butterfly patches Mara had bought before she became too sick to leave the house. Lottie remembered her mother in fragments: lavender lotion, warm hands, a song about the moon and the way Mara used to kiss the tip of her nose. Some nights those fragments turned into nightmares, and Owen would sit beside her bed until dawn, one hand on her back, breathing slowly so she could follow his rhythm back into sleep. That week, for the first time in months, Lottie had gone 7 nights without waking up crying. To anyone else, it would have been a small thing. To Owen, it was a victory worth celebrating. That was why, on a clear Saturday morning, he brought her to the Brass Lantern Café, a polished little place downtown with brass lamps, marble counters, glass pastry cases, and customers who spoke into wireless earbuds as if every sentence might move a market. Owen did not like the café. There were too many entrances, too many reflective surfaces, too many people staring at screens instead of the space around them. But Lottie loved their hot chocolate, the kind served with shaved chocolate curls and a ridiculous cloud of whipped cream. And Owen had learned that love often meant walking willingly into rooms you would rather avoid because someone small felt happy there. He chose a corner booth with his back near the wall, where he could see the front door, the service hallway, the emergency exit, and the counter. Old habits did not retire just because a man signed papers. Lottie sat across from him, swinging her feet, demolishing a blueberry muffin with both hands. Crumbs covered her jacket. Whipped cream painted her upper lip. Owen watched her with the kind of quiet devotion that made his face briefly forget its hardness. Park after this, she asked her mouth full. "Only if that muffin survives the attack," Owen said. Lottie looked down at the ruins on her plate. It was already weak. Owen laughed, and for one clean second, the whole world seemed simple. Then Elara Voss entered the cafe, and the air changed. She did not walk in like a customer. She arrived like a verdict. Tall, elegant, and severe in a white designer suit, she moved across the floor with black sunglasses pushed into her hair, a phone pressed to one ear, and two assistants trailing behind her with tablets and terrified expressions. Elara Voss was the founder and CEO of Voss Meridian Defense Systems, a billion-dollar aerospace and defense technology empire built on satellite guidance systems, private aviation software, and government contracts large enough to make senators smile for cameras. Business magazines called her brilliant. Former employees called her impossible. Competitors called her ruthless. Elara called herself necessary. That morning, she was in Denver to finalize a classified defense agreement worth more than some cities' annual budgets, and the delay in the paperwork had sharpened her temper into something dangerous. "I don't care what legal thinks," she snapped into the phone as she cut past the line. "If they are worried about liability, replace them with people who understand ambition. I am not losing $3 billion because a senior counsel discovered a conscience before noon." A man waiting near the counter glanced up. "Excuse me, the line starts back there." Elara lowered her phone just enough to look at him as if he were an insect on glass. "And relevance ends where my patience does." The man flushed and stepped back. Nobody defended him. A few people looked away. Owen noticed but said nothing. He had learned that not every arrogant person in a room was his mission. His mission was Lottie, her hot chocolate, and the promised park afterward. Behind Elara stood Kellen Rourke, her bodyguard, a large man in a black tailored suit, whose eyes swept the cafe with a military rhythm Owen recognized instantly. Kellen saw exits. He saw angles. He saw hands. He saw threats. For half a second, his gaze passed over Owen and paused not long enough for ordinary people to notice, but long enough for Owen to understand that Kellen had been trained somewhere real. Owen returned his attention to Lottie. She had decided, with the solemn pride of a child trying to be helpful, that she would throw away her muffin wrapper by herself. She slid out of the booth, wrapped both small hands around her hot chocolate, and started toward the trash can near the pastry display. Owen's eyes tracked her automatically. Lottie to trash can 12 feet, clear path except for 3 customers. One chair leg. Elara moving fast. Phone. Attention. Fixed. Collision risk rising. "Lottie, stop!" Owen said, his voice low but carrying across the table. Lottie froze, but Elara turned the corner around the pastry case at the same moment, still speaking into her phone, still looking nowhere except inward at her own fury. She slammed into the child hard enough to knock the cup from Lottie's hands. The ceramic shattered against the floor. Hot chocolate splashed across the polished tile and sprayed over Elara's white heels. Lottie fell backward with a sharp little gasp, landing on her hip and elbow, her eyes wide with shock before the tears came. The cafe stopped. Owen was already moving. One moment he was at the booth, the next he was between Elara and his daughter, crouching just enough to lift Lottie carefully into his arms while keeping his body between the child and the woman in white. "I'm sorry," Lottie whispered, trembling. "Daddy, I dropped it." The words struck Owen harder than any insult could have. "You're okay, Bug," he murmured, one hand steady on the back of her head. "I've got you." Elara stared down at her shoes first, not at the crying child, not at the broken cup, not at the little red mark blooming on Lottie's elbow. Her expression twisted with outrage. "Do you have any idea what these cost?" she snapped. Lottie shrank into Owen's neck. Owen stood slowly. He was taller than Elara expected, broader than she had registered, but his clothes told her the only story she cared to read. Poor, powerless, disposable. "You walked into her," Owen said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made the room listen harder. "You need to lower your voice and apologize to my daughter." Elara laughed sharp and cold. "Apologize? To a child who ruined $4,000 shoes?" Owen's eyes did not change. "Shoes can be cleaned. Children remember." A barista looked down. Someone near the window raised a phone slightly. Elara noticed the shift in attention, and humiliation flashed across her face. She was used to rooms bending toward her, not away from her. "Listen carefully," she said, stepping closer. "I am Elara Voss. I buy companies before breakfast. I sign contracts that keep people like you employed, fed, and quiet. So do not stand there in thrift store flannel and lecture me because your badly raised child wandered into my path." Lottie flinched. Owen's breathing slowed. "Do not speak about my daughter again, or what Elara asked." The question hung in the cafe like a match over gasoline. Owen could feel the old version of himself waking beneath his ribs, the part trained to end threats before they touched what he loved. He could disarm Kellen before the bodyguard crossed 6 feet. He could make Elara understand physically and permanently that she had chosen the wrong man to threaten. But Lottie was watching. Mara's promise was watching. Every lesson his daughter would carry about strength, fear, anger, and love was being written in this moment. So Owen did the hardest thing a dangerous man can do. He controlled himself. "Walk away," he said. Elara's face flushed. "I should call child services. I should tell them you threatened me. I should have her taken somewhere civilized before lunch." Lottie began to cry again, quietly into Owen's shoulder. That was when Owen felt the true difficulty of the morning settle over him, heavier than the stare of the entire cafe, heavier than Elara's wealth, heavier than the bodyguard now shifting behind her. This was no longer about a broken cup. This woman had aimed her power at his child's safety. Owen tightened his arms around Lottie, holding his whole past behind his teeth, and said in a voice so quiet it chilled the room, "You are done talking." Elara drew back her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the brass lantern cafe like a gunshot. Owen's cheek turned red. Lottie whimpered, and every person in the room waited for the tired single father to become what Elara deserved. But Owen did not move. He simply looked at her and asked, "Are you finished?" At that exact moment, Kellen Rourke stepped forward, one hand moving toward his jacket, ready to defend the woman who paid him, unaware that the man he was about to threaten had once walked through fire to save men just like him. Kellen Rourke had crossed the cafe floor with the certainty of a man who had been paid for years to step between danger and the woman who owned his paycheck. His right hand moved toward the inside of his jacket, not quite drawing a weapon, not quite making a threat, but close enough that every person in the Brass Lantern Cafe felt the room tilt toward violence. "Put the child down," he ordered, his voice hard, his shoulders squared, and step away from Ms. Voss. Owen Mercer did not obey. He did not turn fully toward Kellen either. He simply shifted Lottie higher against his chest, covering her ear with one broad hand as she trembled into his collar. That small movement should have looked ordinary, even weak the instinct of a father trying to comfort a frightened child. But Kellen saw something else. He saw how Owen's feet had settled. He saw how the man's weight was balanced, how his left side angled away just enough to protect the child while leaving his right side free. He saw the calm in Owen's eyes, not the frozen panic of a civilian, but the terrifying stillness of someone who had already counted exits, threats, distances, and consequences before anyone else had finished breathing. "Last warning," Kellen said, taking another step. Then Owen's sleeve shifted as Lottie clung to him, and Kellen saw the faded mark on his forearm, a grim insignia half hidden beneath old scar tissue. His eyes snapped upward to the white line along Owen's jaw, then to the face he had last seen under a sky split open by fire. Kellen stopped so abruptly that the polished soles of his shoes squeaked against the tile. The cafe watched the bodyguard's expression drain of color. His hand fell away from his jacket. His mouth opened, but the command he had been about to give died before it became sound. For 8 years, Kellen had carried one memory like shrapnel lodged too deep to remove, a valley outside Marja, smoke crawling over rock. His unit pinned down for 13 hours, 2 men bleeding, the radio breaking into useless static, and a voice cutting through the dark with impossible calm. 4 operators had come down from the ridge when everyone else had decided the rescue was too dangerous. One of them had dragged Rafael Nunez, the unit medic, through open fire while rounds hammered the dirt around him. That man had turned once under moonlight, blood on his sleeve scar along his jaw, eyes colder than fear itself. Commander Owen Mercer. The man some soldiers thanked in whispers because they were alive, only because he had stepped into places other men could not. Now that same man stood 4 feet away in a cafe, holding a crying little girl with a red handprint across his cheek because Kellen's employer had struck him. Slowly, Kellen raised both hands, palms open. "Commander Mercer," he whispered. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you." Silence fell deeper than before. Elara Voss stared at her bodyguard as if he had suddenly spoken a language beneath her. "Kellen," she snapped, "what are you doing?" He did not look at her. His eyes stayed on Owen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower now, urgent in a way that finally touched the edge of fear. "You need to apologize. Right now. Then we need to leave." Elara's face twisted. For one dangerous second, she could not understand that the room had shifted without her permission. A minute earlier, she had been the richest, loudest, most feared person inside the cafe. Now her own bodyguard stood with his hands raised before a man she had dismissed as nobody. "Apologize," she said, laughing once. But there was panic inside the sound. "Have you lost your mind? He threatened me." Kellen turned then, and the look he gave her made her take a step back. It was not disobedience. It was not embarrassment. It was recognition of something far larger than her anger. "No," he said. "You threatened his child. Then you struck him. You work for me, not anymore." Kellen removed the earpiece from his ear and dropped it onto the floor. The tiny piece of black plastic hit the tile with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. "I quit." The words passed through the room like a blade. Phones rose higher. Customers who had spent the first part of the confrontation pretending not to see now stared openly. Elara looked around and realized, perhaps for the first time in years, that people were not waiting for her command. They were waiting for her consequence. That realization enraged her more than Owen's calm had. "This is absurd," she said, lifting her chin, trying to rebuild herself out of status and money. "I do not care what soldier fantasy you two are performing. I am Elara Voss. I am here to close a $3 billion defense agreement. I know senators. I know generals. I know men who can make one call and end careers before lunch." Owen's jaw tightened slightly, not because she threatened him, but because Lottie heard the word end and clutched him harder. He lowered his voice until only the nearest people could hear. "Lottie, listen to me. You are safe. Nothing that woman says changes that." Lottie nodded against his shoulder, but her little hands still shook. Owen felt the old instinct rise again. Not anger exactly. Anger was too hot, too clumsy. This was colder, older, cleaner. Identify the threat, end the threat, move the child to safety. His mind offered him solutions faster than conscience could argue with them. Disable Kellen if necessary. Break Elara's control of the room. Remove Lottie through the side exit. Vanish before reporters came. The dangerous part of him knew how easy it would be, but another part, the part Mara had trusted when she asked him to protect their daughter's laughter, knew that easy was not always right. If he disappeared now, Elara would rewrite the story. She would call him unstable, violent, dangerous. She would turn his restraint into guilt and Lottie's tears into evidence. For years, Owen had survived by staying unseen. Now staying unseen might let a lie grow teeth. That was the decision before him, and it was harder than the slap, harder than the insult, harder than standing still while a room waited for him to become the monster Elara deserved. He could protect Lottie by leaving, or he could protect her by allowing the truth to stand in public where no one could bury it. For the first time that morning, Owen understood that silence alone was not enough. Restraint had kept him from becoming cruel, but truth would have to do the rest. Elara, mistaking his quiet for weakness, again pulled out her phone. "I am calling General Adrian Cole," she announced, as if invoking a name from Olympus. "When he hears that a volatile ex-soldier threatened me in public, this little performance ends." Kellen's face went rigid. "Elara, don't!" She ignored him and tapped the screen. The call rang twice before a deep, irritated voice answered. "Elara, this had better be about the final language on the contract." Her tone changed instantly, polished and wounded. "General Cole, I apologize for interrupting, but I have been assaulted in a cafe downtown. A local man threatened me after his child damaged my property, and my bodyguard is refusing to intervene because he apparently knows him." Owen said nothing. He only adjusted Lottie's jacket where hot chocolate had dampened the sleeve. "Call local law enforcement," Cole said curtly. "I'm in a briefing." Elara's eyes flicked to Owen, triumphant. "He called him Commander Mercer," she added. "Scar on his jaw, some grim tattoo on his arm. Kellen is acting like he saw a ghost." The line went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that made Elara's smile falter. "General," she said. When Adrian Cole spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "Put him on the phone." Elara blinked. "Excuse me? Put him on the phone, Elara. Now." The command in his tone was so sharp even she obeyed. She held the phone toward Owen as if it had become something hot in her hand. Owen did not take it. He leaned slightly toward the speaker. "Adrian," he said, "it's Mercer. On the other end of the line." The general exhaled like a man who had just realized a bridge was burning beneath his feet. "Owen," he said, and the respect in that single word traveled through the cafe more powerfully than any title Elara had ever used. "How's Lottie?" Elara's face went pale. Owen rubbed his daughter's back. "She was having a good morning. Then your contractor walked into her, knocked her down, screamed at her, threatened to have her taken from me, and slapped me when I asked for an apology." The pause that followed seemed to remove the air from the room. "She slapped you?" Cole asked, his voice low. "Yes." Elara surged forward. "General, that is not the full context. He intimidated me. His child ruined—" "Stop talking," Cole snapped. Elara froze. No assistant lawyer, board member, or rival had ever spoken to her like that in public and survived professionally. But Cole continued, colder now. "You are standing in front of a man who has given more to this country than your entire executive floor could comprehend if I briefed them for a month. The fact that you struck him and are still standing is not evidence of your power. It is evidence of his restraint." Owen closed his eyes briefly, not from pride, but from exhaustion. He had never wanted this part of himself brought into Lottie's morning. He had wanted muffins, hot chocolate, a park bench, maybe ice cream if she negotiated well. Instead, his past had walked into the cafe and stood beside him like a witness. General Elara said, and now her voice trembled. The contract. There is no contract, Cole said. The words landed cleanly. Effective immediately, Voss Meridian Defense Systems is suspended from all active acquisition discussions pending review. If this is how your judgment operates in public, I have serious concerns about your judgment around classified defense systems. Elara staggered half a step. You can't do that. I can, and I just did. Do not call me again unless counsel is present. His voice softened only when he addressed Owen. I'm sorry, Owen. Give Lottie my best. Take care, Adrian, Owen said. The call ended. For a long second, no one moved. Elara stood with the phone still raised, her empire cracking invisibly around her. Owen looked at Lottie at the tear tracks on her cheeks and made another decision. He would not chase punishment. He would not feed the crowd's hunger for humiliation. But he would also not hide from the truth anymore. When the police lights flashed against the cafe windows moments later, and Elara lunged toward the officers with a brand new lie forming on her tongue, Owen remained still. He no longer needed to overpower anyone. The room had seen enough. The phones had recorded enough. And for the first time since Mara died, Owen understood that protecting his daughter did not always mean carrying her away from the storm. Sometimes it meant standing in the center of it long enough for everyone to see who had brought the thunder. The police lights painted the front windows of the Brass Lantern Café in red and blue, just as Elara Voss found a new version of herself to perform. One moment she had stood pale and speechless with General Adrian Cole's final words still ringing from her phone, and the next she moved toward the officers as if the uniformed men had entered the room to restore the natural order of her life. Thank God, she said, her voice sharp with manufactured fear. Officers, arrest that man! He threatened me, his child attacked me, and my own bodyguard has become unstable. Officer Dana Pike, a compact woman with gray at her temples and the calm eyes of someone who had heard too many lies spoken by expensive mouths, looked past Elara to the broken ceramic on the floor, the spilled hot chocolate, the little girl trembling against her father's chest, and the red handprint still burning across Owen Mercer's cheek. Her partner moved slightly to the side, taking in the raised phones around the cafe. Owen did not speak first. That was his first deliberate action. Every instinct he had learned in war told him to control the scene, give the cleanest report, establish facts before the enemy shaped them. But this was not a battlefield, and he was no longer leading men through smoke. He was holding Lottie, and she needed to see that truth did not have to panic. So he remained still, his hand moving slowly along her back, letting the room breathe around the lie Elara had just thrown into it. Sir Officer Pike said, "Are you injured?" "No," Owen answered. His voice was quiet. "My daughter fell. She may have hurt her elbow." Lottie pulled tighter against him, whispering, "I'm okay." But Owen felt the tremor in her body and knew she was saying it for him, the way children try to protect adults from worry when they already feel like a burden. That hurt more than the slap. Elara seized the pause. He is manipulating the situation. Look at him. He is calm because men like that know how to intimidate people without leaving marks. Kellen Rourke stepped forward from behind her, his face hard now, not with loyalty but with shame. "Officer, that is false." Elara turned on him. "You are fired." "I already quit," Kellen said. Then Evan Holt, the young man Elara had humiliated in line, stood from his table with his phone raised in one shaking hand. "Officer, I recorded the whole thing." His voice cracked, but he did not sit down. She cut the line insulted people walked into. The little girl screamed at her, threatened to take her from her father, and slapped him. A woman near the pastry case said, "I have it too." A barista lifted her phone. "So do I." Another voice from the back added, "Mine shows the collision." For the first time, Elara looked not angry but cornered. The cafe, which had been silent when cruelty first entered, had found its voice all at once. Officer Pike watched one clip, then another. Her expression did not change much, but something in her jaw settled. "Ms. Voss," she said, "turn around and place your hands behind your back." Elara recoiled as if the order itself were an assault. Absolutely not. Do you understand who I am? I understand what I just saw. You will regret this. You can explain that downtown. The handcuffs clicked and Lottie flinched at the sound. Owen turned her face gently toward his shoulder before Elara began shouting. The CEO's voice rose through threats, lawsuits, senators, judges, careers ruined by mourning. But each sentence sounded smaller than the last because no one in the room moved to rescue her from the consequences she had spent years teaching others to fear. Owen did not watch her leave. He watched Lottie. He looked at the small red mark on her elbow, the chocolate drying on her sleeve, the way her lips pressed together to stop them from quivering. When the glass doors closed behind Elara and the police lights faded away from the windows, the cafe remained trapped in the aftermath, unsure whether to return to normal or admit normal had been broken. The barista came over with a fresh cup of hot chocolate in both hands. "Sir," she said softly, "please. On the house. And I'm sorry. We should have stepped in sooner." Owen looked at the cup, then at her frightened kindness. "Thank you," he said, "but not here." Lottie lifted her head. "Daddy, I ruined everything." Owen crouched beside her right there in the cafe, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers. This was the second thing he chose to do, not leave the wound unnamed. "No, Bug. You did not ruin anything. A cup broke, that is all. What happened after was not your fault. She was mad because of me. She was mad before she ever walked through that door." Lottie looked confused, so Owen softened his voice. "Some people carry storms inside them, and when they spill out, they blame whoever is standing close." Lottie swallowed. "Do I have a storm?" "No," he said, brushing a crumb from her jacket. "You have butterflies." A tiny broken smile touched her mouth, and Owen felt the first breath of the morning that did not cut on the way in. He thanked the witnesses, gave Officer Pike his contact information, and allowed Kellen to walk them through the side exit when reporters began gathering outside the front. That was when the next test began. Owen had thought the hardest part was not striking back. He was wrong. By the time he buckled Lottie into the back seat of his old truck, the video was already online. By the time he drove 3 blocks, strangers had given it a title. By the time he reached the quiet street where their rental house sat beneath 2 tired maple trees, his phone had begun vibrating with calls from numbers he did not recognize. He turned it off before Lottie could ask why. "Are we still going to the park?" she asked from the back seat, her voice small, testing whether the world could still contain promises after something ugly had happened. Owen looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Not today," he said gently, and saw her face fall. Then he added, "Today we build a blanket fort, make hot chocolate at home, and put too many marshmallows in it." How many is too many? We'll find the limit. That answer helped, but not enough. At home, Owen locked the door, checked the windows without making it obvious, and guided Lottie through the familiar rituals that made their house feel safe. Shoes by the mat, jacket on the hook, hands washed with the lavender soap Mara used to buy, the blue blanket from the hallway closet, pillows from the couch. Lottie crawled into the fort with her stuffed rabbit and tried to watch cartoons, but Owen could tell she was listening to him move through the kitchen. He made cocoa, slowly giving his own hands something ordinary to do while his mind worked. He needed to protect her privacy. He needed to prevent Elara's lawyers from twisting the story. He needed to make sure no agency, no reporter, no opportunist could reach into his daughter's life and turn trauma into content. For years, Owen had solved problems by disappearing. New name if necessary, new city, no interviews, no photographs, no explanations. But as he stood at the kitchen counter, he realized disappearing would teach Lottie the wrong lesson. It would teach her that when powerful people hurt you, you hide. It would teach her that truth was something to escape with, not something to stand beside. So Owen turned his phone back on, ignored the news alerts, and called Officer Pike. He asked how to submit a formal statement. He asked how to preserve witness videos. He asked what steps would prevent false reports against his parental custody. He spoke calmly, clearly, as a father building a wall not of violence, but of documentation. Then he called General Adrian Cole, not for revenge, but to ask one thing: keep Lottie out of it. "The story will move fast," Cole warned. "Your name is already circulating. Let it," Owen said. "Not hers." There was a pause. Understood. But the unexpected event came just before sunset. A black SUV stopped across the street from Owen's house. At first he thought it was press. Then two people stepped out, a woman in a gray suit holding a folder and a man with a tablet. Child Protective Services. Owen's body went cold in a way the cafe had not managed. Lottie was asleep inside the blanket fort, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, chocolate still faintly on her sleeve. Owen opened the door before they could knock twice. "Mr. Mercer," the woman asked. "I'm Claire Danton. We received an emergency welfare complaint regarding your daughter." Owen felt something old and lethal rise in him, but he held it down so hard it became stillness. This was Elara's final poison, or the echo of it. Even in handcuffs, even disgraced, her threat had found a way to reach his porch. "My daughter is asleep," he said. "She has had a difficult day." "We understand, but the complaint alleges aggressive behavior, public threats, and possible emotional instability." The words were polite. The danger beneath them was not. Owen could survive public humiliation. He could survive headlines. He could survive the resurrection of a past he had buried. But the thought of strangers entering his house to inspect whether he deserved his own child nearly broke the discipline he had spent a lifetime building. This was the real battle he understood, not Elara, not the slap, not the video. The real battle was whether he could protect Lottie without letting fear turn him into the violent man Elara had accused him of being. He opened the door wider. "You can come in," he said. "You can see that she is safe. You can speak to the officer who reviewed the footage. You can watch every video from that cafe. But you will not wake my daughter unless the law requires it. And if the law requires it, you will do it gently." Claire Danton studied him for a moment, perhaps expecting rage and finding instead a father holding himself together by will alone. "That's reasonable," she said. Owen stepped aside. The two officials entered, and with them came the hardest test of the day, to stand in his own home with his child asleep behind a blanket wall and prove calmly to strangers that love was not a threat. As Claire reviewed the videos and Officer Pike confirmed the facts over the phone, Owen remained beside the kitchen table, hands visible, voice-controlled heart hammering in silence. When Claire finally closed her folder, her expression had changed. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "based on what we've seen, there is no immediate concern regarding your daughter's safety in your care. I'm sorry this report was made." Owen nodded, but relief did not come all at once. It arrived slowly, painfully, like blood returning to a numb limb. After they left, he locked the door and went to the blanket fort. Lottie stirred as he sat beside her. "Danny, I'm here. Was it the storm lady?" Owen looked toward the dark window where the last light had faded from the glass. "Maybe. Are we okay?" He pulled the blanket around her small shoulders and made the decision that would carry him into whatever came next. He would not run. He would not hide. He would not let Elara's cruelty become the shape of their life. "Yes," he said, "but tomorrow we tell the truth the right way." Lottie closed her eyes again, trusting him completely. Owen sat beside her long after she slept, understanding that the conflict had grown larger than a cafe, larger than a slap, larger than one billionaire's downfall. Now it was about the kind of world his daughter would believe she lived in. And Owen Mercer, who had once crossed battlefields for men with rifles, was ready to cross something far more frightening for one little girl with butterfly patches: the public eye, the legal system, the noise of strangers, and every lie that tried to make her feel small. By morning, Owen Mercer understood that a man could survive war grief, public humiliation, and still be nearly undone by the sound of his daughter making breakfast too quietly. Lottie usually filled the kitchen with small noises: the scrape of a chair dragged across the floor, the cheerful slap of cabinet doors, the serious humming she used when deciding between cereal and toast. But that morning, after the social workers had left and the whole world seemed to have discovered the worst 10 minutes of their lives, she moved as if noise itself might bring trouble back to the door. Owen stood in the hallway and watched her place her butterfly cup on the table, then hesitate before reaching for the cocoa tin, her eyes flicking toward him as though she needed permission to want the same thing she had loved yesterday. That was the moment something inside him changed. Until then, Owen had treated the conflict like a threat to contain, document the lie, protect the child, block the reporters, keep the past buried as much as possible. But now he saw the deeper wound. Elara Voss had not only frightened Lottie in a cafe, she had made the child question whether joy was safe. She had turned hot chocolate cafes, strangers, and even helpfulness into things that carried risk. Owen had spent years believing that if he stood between his daughter and danger, she would remain untouched by it. But childhood was more delicate than a perimeter. Harm did not always need to enter the house to change the air inside it. He walked into the kitchen, lowered himself into the chair across from her, and did something he had avoided since Mara died. He admitted he did not know exactly how to fix everything. "Bug," he said softly, "yesterday scared you." Lottie looked down at the spoon in her hand. "I'm not scared." Owen heard himself in the lie. The same flat answer he had given medics, commanders, and friends whenever the truth would have made someone worry. "You don't have to protect me from knowing," he said. "That's my job with you, not your job with me." Her lower lip trembled. "I thought they were going to take me." Owen closed his eyes for half a second, long enough to feel the sentence enter him and settle like a stone. When he opened them, he did not offer the easy answer that no one could ever take her, because yesterday had proven that adults with clipboards could appear because a powerful woman had made a phone call. Instead, he gave her the truth he wished someone had given him as a boy. People can say frightening things. Sometimes they can even make trouble. But trouble is not the same as truth. And the truth is that you are safe with me. I am your father, and I will fight for you the right way. "The right way?" she asked. Owen looked at his hands on the table, scarred hands that had once solved problems by force and now shook slightly from holding back too much feeling. "The way that does not make you afraid of me, too." Lottie was quiet for a long time, then slid off her chair and climbed into his lap. Owen held her carefully, feeling the small weight of her trust return to him one breath at a time. That morning became the beginning of his transformation, not because he became less dangerous, but because he stopped thinking of restraint as the end of his duty. Restraint had prevented him from becoming what Elara wanted the world to believe he was. Now, courage required action. He called Officer Dana Pike and gave a full, formal statement, not the clipped version of a soldier describing an incident, but the complete account of a father explaining what his daughter had seen, heard, and feared. He forwarded every witness video his attorney could collect, asked for copies of the false welfare complaint, and agreed to cooperate with investigators only under one condition. Lottie's name and face would be protected wherever legally possible. Then, against every old instinct in his body, he called a local veterans legal clinic and asked for help. Asking was harder than any of the calls. Owen had built his second life on being useful, not needing use. He fixed neighbors' porches, changed tires for strangers, carried groceries for elderly women, and quietly paid school lunch balances when he could. Need had always felt dangerous to him because need meant exposing a weak point. But when the attorney on the phone, a former Navy lawyer named Irene Shaw, said, "You don't have to handle this alone," Owen did not reject the words. He wrote down her address. By noon, the consequences of the cafe had begun to move beyond him. News vans gathered outside Voss Meridian headquarters. Elara's board announced an emergency review. The Department of Defense confirmed the suspension of acquisition discussions. Former employees began telling stories of firings, threats, impossible deadlines, and a culture built around fear of Elara's moods. People who had once praised her brilliance now spoke cautiously about toxic leadership, ethical failure, and public accountability. Owen watched none of it live. He refused to let their living room become a courtroom for strangers' outrage. But Irene summarized what mattered. The video was too clear, the witnesses too many, the general's suspension too public, and Elara's attempt to trigger a welfare complaint too serious to disappear beneath a polished statement. They will try to make this about your military background, Irene warned. They may imply you were unstable, that your calm was threatening, that your past makes you dangerous. Owen looked through her office window at Lottie coloring in the waiting area, her tongue caught between her teeth as she filled in the wings of a butterfly. My past does make me dangerous, he said. Irene paused. Mr. Mercer, but not to my daughter. Not to people in cafes. Not unless I choose wrong. The words surprised him as much as they did her. For years, Owen had treated his past like a locked room full of weapons. He feared that if the door opened, everyone would see only violence. But now he began to understand that hiding the weapons did not prove he was peaceful. Choosing not to use them did. That afternoon, he and Lottie went to the park they had missed the day before. Owen almost canceled when he saw two reporters parked near the end of the block, but Lottie stood by the door wearing her butterfly jacket and holding her stuffed rabbit like a flag of fragile defiance. You said trouble isn't truth, she reminded him. So they went. Kellen Rourke met them there, not as a bodyguard, not as a man seeking forgiveness, but as someone trying to return a piece of what had been disturbed. He stood at the edge of the playground in plain clothes, hands visible, posture, respectful. I can keep distance, he said when Owen approached. I just wanted to make sure the press didn't come nearer. Owen studied him. The old battlefield memory between them did not need to be spoken. You don't work for me, Owen said. No, Kellen replied. But yesterday I remembered who I should have been before a paycheck made me forget. That honesty disarmed Owen more than any apology would have. He allowed Kellen to stay near the path while Lottie climbed the slide, and for the first time since the cafe, Owen felt that the world might contain helpers as well as threats. The unexpected step toward reconciliation came 3 days later in the form of a cream-colored envelope delivered to Owen's porch by courier. Elara Voss's name was written on the back. Owen stood with it in his hand for nearly a minute, feeling the old anger rise, not explosive but protective. Part of him wanted to tear it in half unread. Part of him wanted to send it to Irene without touching a word. But Lottie was at school, the house was quiet, and Owen knew that solving the conflict did not only mean proving Elara wrong. It meant deciding how much power her wrong would keep over his life. He opened the letter at the kitchen table. The handwriting was uneven, nothing like the perfect signatures on corporate filings. Elara wrote that she had watched the video again and again, with the sound muted first, then finally with the sound on, and that hearing her own voice aimed at a crying child had shown her a version of herself no quarterly report could hide. She wrote about building Voss Meridian after years of being dismissed by men who called her too sharp, too ambitious, too cold, and how somewhere along the climb she had mistaken cruelty for discipline because cruelty produced quick obedience. She did not ask Owen to defend her. She did not ask him to drop charges. She did not ask to meet Lottie. She wrote that none of her history excused what she had done. Near the end, one sentence stopped him completely. Your daughter apologized for a cup, and I realized I had broken something inside her that no money could replace. Owen set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. Forgiveness did not arrive. He did not want it to arrive cheaply. He thought of Lottie whispering that she had ruined everything. He thought of the social workers at the door. He thought of Mara, who had believed gentleness was not the opposite of strength, but its purpose. When Lottie came home, she found him still at the table. Bad news, she asked. Owen folded the letter once. Hard news. From the storm lady. He nodded. Lottie climbed onto the chair beside him. Is she still stormy? Owen looked at the envelope, then at his daughter's open, searching face. This was another choice. He could teach her that people who hurt them became monsters forever safely hated and easily understood. Or he could teach her the more difficult truth that consequences and hope could exist in the same room, that being harmed did not require becoming cruel, and that reconciliation, if it ever came, began with honesty, not excuses. I think Owen said slowly, "She saw the storm." Lottie considered that. Does seeing it make it stop? No. Owen touched the edge of the butterfly patch on her sleeve. But nobody can fix what they refuse to see. That evening, Owen placed Elara's letter in a folder beside the legal documents, not as proof of innocence and not as a symbol of forgiveness, but as evidence that the conflict was changing shape. It was no longer only about a billionaire who had abused her power or a father defending his child. It was becoming a question of what justice should leave behind after punishment had done its work. Owen did not know the answer yet, but for the first time he was willing to search for it without running, without hiding, and without letting anger decide what kind of father Lottie would remember. The courtroom was already full when Owen Mercer arrived with Lottie's small hand wrapped inside his. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras lowered for now, but ready, while veterans stood quietly along the wall, not in uniform, not invited by any official group, but present in the silent way soldiers appear when one of their own is facing something that cannot be solved with weapons. Kellen Rourke sat near the aisle, his shoulders tense, his eyes lowered, and beside him was Rafael Nunez, the former medic Owen had once pulled through gunfire in a valley nobody in that courtroom would ever see on a map. Officer Dana Pike stood near the front with a file in her hands. Irene Shaw, Owen's attorney, leaned close and reminded him that he did not have to speak unless he chose to. Owen nodded, but his attention was on Lottie. She wore her butterfly jacket, the same one stained by hot chocolate a week earlier, now carefully washed, the patches bright again. She had asked to come, and Owen had struggled with the decision all night. Part of him wanted to hide her from every echo of what had happened, but another part knew that hiding the ending might make the beginning more frightening. Lottie had seen cruelty. She had seen lies. She had seen strangers come to their door because a powerful woman had tried to turn fear into a weapon. Now Owen wanted her to see something else, that truth could stand up in daylight, that consequences could happen without hatred, and that a family did not heal by pretending the wound had never existed. When Elara Voss entered, the whispering stopped. She did not look like the woman who had swept into the Brass Lantern Café in a white suit and a crown of invisible authority. There were no sunglasses, no assistants, no sharp smile, no phone held like a blade. She wore a simple dark dress, her hair pulled back, her face pale and tired in a way that no publicist could have designed. For the first time since Owen had known her name, she looked less like an empire and more like a person standing inside the wreckage of one. Her attorney rose immediately, ready to soften the story, ready to describe pressure, confusion, misunderstanding, stress, and the kind of careful language powerful people use when they want guilt to sound like weather. But Elara touched his sleeve and shook her head. The courtroom shifted. The judge looked over his glasses. "Ms. Voss, are you choosing to speak?" Elara stood. Her hands trembled once before she clasped them together. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was not strong at first, but it did not break. "I do not contest the facts. I walked into a child because I was not paying attention. I shouted at her. I threatened her father. I struck Mr. Mercer in public. Then I lied to officers and attempted to use my position to control the consequences." Cameras clicked like insects in the back. Elara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them and continued. "There is no business pressure, no contract, no personal history, no past struggle that makes that acceptable." Owen felt Lottie lean against his side. He looked down and saw her watching Elara with a child's serious confusion, the kind that still left room for questions adults had learned to replace with judgment. Elara turned slightly toward them, but not too far, as if she understood she had no right to demand their full attention. "Mr. Mercer, I am sorry," she said. "Not because I lost a contract, not because I was arrested, not because my board removed me before I resigned. I am sorry because your daughter apologized for a cup after I made her afraid to exist in my way. I made a child feel guilty for my cruelty. I cannot undo that. I can only name it." The room was silent. Owen did not answer. He had learned over the last week that silence could be many things. In the cafe, it had been restraint. At home, it had nearly become fear. Here, in the courtroom, it became space. Space for truth to finish speaking without being rescued, punished, or polished into something easier to digest. The judge reviewed the videos, the witness statements, the false welfare complaint, the call to General Adrian Cole, and the public consequences already unfolding around Voss Meridian defense systems. The Department of Defense review remained active. The board had accepted Elara's resignation. Civil penalties and criminal consequences would follow. The judge ordered community service, anger management counseling, restitution to the cafe, a public apology, and a permanent record of the assault. It was not the theatrical destruction the internet wanted. It was not the absolute forgiveness some commentators had already begun demanding from Owen. It was something harder and more honest accountability without performance. When the hearing ended, reporters rushed toward the exits, desperate to turn the final moment into a headline. Owen guided Lottie through a side corridor away from the cameras, but Elara's voice stopped him near the courthouse steps. "Commander Mercer." Owen paused. Lottie held tighter to his hand. Elara stood several feet away, careful not to come closer. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she said. Owen studied her. The old anger was still there, but it no longer owned the whole room inside him. He thought of Mara, of her thin hand in his at the hospital, of her belief that gentleness was not something weak people used because they had no other choice, but something strong people protected because the world would always try to kill it first. "No one deserves it," Owen said quietly. "That is why it matters when it is real." Elara's eyes filled, but she did not step toward him. "Will Lottie be all right?" Owen looked down at his daughter. Lottie was looking at Elara now, not smiling, not afraid in the same way as before, simply watching. "She has questions," Owen said. "Children should not have to." "No," Elara whispered. "They shouldn't." Lottie tugged gently on Owen's hand. He bent down. "Daddy," she whispered loud enough for only him to hear. "Is she still the storm lady?" Owen looked at Elara, then back at Lottie. "I think she is learning what storms do." Lottie considered that, then looked at Elara. "You scared me," she said. The words were small, but they struck harder than every legal statement in the courtroom. Elara's face crumpled, not dramatically, not for cameras, but with the plain pain of hearing the truth from the person least responsible for giving it. "I know," she said. "I am sorry." Lottie nodded once, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. Then she stepped behind Owen again, and Owen understood that this was enough for today. Months passed before the world stopped replaying the slap. The headlines faded, the outrage moved on, and strangers found newer villains to hate from a distance. Voss Meridian restructured under new leadership. Elara vanished from business magazines and began working quietly at first with programs supporting veteran families and children affected by trauma. Some people called it image repair, some called it guilt. Owen did not argue either way. People rarely changed all at once. Sometimes the first honest step still carried selfishness in its shadow. But a beginning was not nothing. Kellen visited once with Rafael Nunez, who arrived with a cane. A shy smile and photos of 3 children who existed because Owen had once refused to leave him behind. Lottie made both grown men sit on the living room floor and judge a butterfly drawing contest. Rafael chose hers as the winner before seeing any other entries, which she declared suspicious but acceptable. Owen stood in the doorway watching his daughter laugh beneath paper butterflies taped to the wall, and the sound reached somewhere grief had been sitting for years. Mara's promise had not been easy. It had not been clean, but it was still alive. 6 months after the cafe, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was a ceramic mug painted with blue butterflies. Beneath it lay a card with only 7 words. Cups can be replaced. Childhood cannot. Owen showed it to Lottie at the kitchen table. She ran one finger over the painted wing. "Did she learn?" she asked. Owen looked out the window at the soft gold of evening touching the fence.
Maybe she started.
Lottie nodded with the solemn wisdom of children who accept beginnings more easily than adults. Starting is good. That night, they took the mug to the park filled with hot chocolate made at home because Lottie said Café hot chocolate was too dramatic now. They sat beneath the oak trees while the sky turned amber and the grass cooled under the evening air. Lottie leaned against Owen's side, safe, warm, and full of marshmallows. "Daddy?" she asked. "Yeah, Bug.
If someone is mean again, will you still not hit them?"
Owen wiped chocolate from her upper lip with a napkin. "I will always protect you. But will you be quiet?" Owen looked across the park where children chased each other through the last light, and parents called them gently back from the edge of the path. He thought of the cafe, the courtroom, the social workers, the letter, the apology, the long road between consequence and healing. "If quiet is enough," he said, "and if it's not,"
Owen kissed the top of her head,
"then I'll still be your dad first." Lottie accepted that completely and returned to her hot chocolate. Owen put an arm around her and finally understood what the whole storm had taught him. Strength was not the power to strike back. He had always had that. Strength was choosing what his daughter would inherit from him. Not rage, not fear, not the reflex to answer cruelty with more cruelty, but dignity under pressure, truth without violence, and love steady enough to stand in public while lies burned themselves out. Elara Voss had thought she slapped a nobody. Instead, she struck a mirror, and everyone in that cafe saw who they were. Some saw cowardice. Some found courage. One woman saw the monster her ambition had made. One little girl learned that broken cups are not broken childhoods. And one father learned that the strongest hand is sometimes the one that does not strike because it is too busy holding on to what matters most.